Hi, I'm Bill Rubenstein, your SAT expert at professorit.com. Here we're going to talk about the SAT verbal sections. What are they all about? A lot of experts have made a living out of attacking the SAT. They say it doesn't predict success, whatever that means, or that it doesn't measure reasoning ability as well as it should. They find sympathetic audiences too, especially among students who are already worn out by schoolwork and nervous about college applications. Some of these experts offer coaching services at a high fee, of course, proposing ways to trick the test, that is, using shortcuts to improve your score. After tutoring the SAT for several years, I find this approach cynical and self-defeating. Whether or not the SAT is a perfectly designed test, it remains a thoughtfully designed one. And it's a test that attempts to evaluate skills which are of great importance to every student, and indeed to anyone who wants to improve their ability to detect true arguments from false ones, or simply to engage on a serious level with the issues of the day. Why is this? Because the SAT reasoning test attempts to find out whether or not the test taker is actually thinking, or at least using certain thinking skills, which sometimes get labeled reasoning. And while human beings have various ways of acquiring knowledge, reasoning is a fairly important tool to have in the modern world. How does the SAT verbal test attempt to find out if you know how to reason? By examining your ability to read, write, and think using the English language. That doesn't mean just understanding vocabulary. It means understanding how the mechanics of language and the mechanics of thought are integrated. In school, kids are taught a lot of things, but except in AP courses or in other exceptional circumstances, thinking isn't one of them. Kids learn to memorize and regurgitate information. In the real world, memorization isn't much preparation for solving complicated problems like balancing the federal budget, curing cancer, addressing issues of global climate change, or finding ways to teach American students so they can address complex issues with sophisticated answers. This is where reasoning comes in. But let's return again to the question we already raised. What exactly is reasoning? This calls for a short history of the human brain. Most people who already know how to reason would agree that some version of Darwin's theory of evolution is essentially correct, that our brains are the product of eons of adaptation to experience. One way we do this is by a process of association. We touch something hot, it burns us. We avoid touching it again. This is something we're hardwired to do, it seems. Schools reinforce this type of learning by teaching us that if we memorize that 5 times 5 is 25, we'll get a good grade. Society also encourages this kind of thinking and learning. We're shown images of sports heroes drinking sugary drinks and hanging out with beautiful people on the beach, and we make the association that if we drink the same sugary drinks, we'll get to do the same. It might not occur to us that we're more likely just to get fat and end up on the couch watching some dumb TV show. We just can't believe somehow that that sweet drink isn't going to hook us up to those pretty people and that pretty beach. We feel this like a craving. We tell ourselves it isn't true, but we don't believe ourselves, not deep down, not once we feel that urge. Our brains have made an association. In this case, the drink, that beach, and every time we think about the drink and the beach, our desire for it wells up within us. It's out of our control. In fact, researchers tell us that our brains lay down permanent records of these associations, and even if scientists, friends, teachers, and later experience tells us that sugary drinks lead only to obesity and diabetes, once we've made the association with that beach, it's pretty much impossible to convince ourselves that the lie wasn't true. So, as a recent article in the New York Times explained, our brains lie to us. So do politicians. When President Obama built his campaign on hope, you had to vote against hope if you didn't want him. When John McCain based his campaign on country first, you'd have to vote against your country if you thought he wasn't the best choice. How could you do that? All those American flags waving at the convention and you were against him? When gas prices were pushing $5 a gallon, Sarah Palin ran around the country getting crowds to chant, "Drill, baby, drill," knowing that people would associate gushing oil with lower gas prices, even though most economists explain that even if every environmental law were removed from the books and the oil companies could drill in everyone's backyard in Tallahassee, the net effect on gas prices would have been nil. In fact, if we had drilled, baby, drilled in 2008, it might have raised prices because the world would have seen the U.S. committing itself further to a single energy source rather than diversifying in ways which in the long run might lower the demand for oil and lower the price. But getting to that argument would have required reasoning, which some of Sarah Palin's supporters seemed unable to muster. Emotion-based arguments work, in fact, because people are not reasoning. They are responding to stimuli which activate some receptor in their brain, much like moths who respond to the light on your porch, or a bee responding to the smell of nectar in a flower. If you need further proof of the natural tendency of the human organism, go to Las Vegas and watch the crowds gaping at the neon. Incidentally, when politicians don't use emotion-based arguments, many people will switch them off and say they're boring. Instead, they're likely to listen to some radio or TV commentator foaming at the mouth, spreading attractive lies, which usually contain at least a particle of the truth, the one so distorted as to be worse than a lie. That's why it's hard to blame the politician who resorts to these tricks, because the man who speaks calmly and appeals only to reason is likely to find himself abandoned by the crowd. I know what you're asking yourself. What does this have to do with the SAT? Well, just about everything. This is the test designed to find the future leaders of the country, the ones who can tell truth from lies. Obviously, the country requires brains with something other than moth-like reflexes at work if we're going to get ourselves out of debt, keep us safe from terrorism, become energy sufficient, cure cancer and AIDS, and become rich businessmen with beach houses in the islands. The truth is, only a very small fraction of Americans will have the intellectual capacity to solve these problems. The sad part is this: it doesn't have to be this way. The ability to think on a higher level, to solve problems through analysis, is a skill that anybody can learn. The SAT is not an intelligence test. It is a test of thinking skills, specifically the skill of reading and analyzing what you read. Let me make an analogy. We've all seen crime shows on TV. The police come into a room where a crime has taken place. A body's on the floor. There are no signs of a struggle, but the autopsy shows the victim was strangled. Careful police work will look at all the clues in the room and not only find the murderer, they'll be able to tell you why he did it. A moth can't do that. And the police don't have to be geniuses. They just have to learn the tools of analysis. They have to use the tools of reasoning. If they can't, the problem can't be solved. But to solve the problem, you have to want to solve it, because learning how is hard work. And who wants to do hard work? So you see, the desire to seek out the truth is part of what's being tested here. Curiosity is a key characteristic of people who invent the future. There are only a finite number of positions in top universities. These universities train students to learn the skills they will need to solve problems in the sciences, arts, politics, and everything else. Obviously, they want to find the students who are most likely to contribute in their quest to solve these problems. So the SAT helps them find these students, the students who possess the curiosity to seek answers and the grit to roll up their sleeves. Like life itself, then, the SAT verbal sections are not a test in what you know. They're a test in what you can figure out. In fact, as I said before, they're a game, a rather sophisticated game which anyone can learn to play. And the more people who can play it well, the better off we as a country are likely to be. Whether or not you plan to go to selective college, learning to think analytically is a great asset for everything else you're likely to do in life. After all, do you really want to go through life thinking like a moth? I'm Bill Rubenstein, your SAT expert at ProfessorIt.com.